Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket.
That was the chant heard in Minneapolis just a day after news broke that Texas deputy Darren Goforth had been shot and killed, execution style. His murder raising suggestions that anti-cop rhetoric from some in the Black Lives Matter movement has gotten out of hand. That question comes after we have seen the protests spring up repeatedly on the campaign trail, with activists shouting down candidates, demanding recognition, even forcing one event to be canceled. So what does this mean for 2016? How should the candidates handle this group? And what about those who have already expressed support for the cause? Let's bring back our panel now. Let's just start with the Democratic National Committee, which, you know, it may have been a case of bad timing, but no sooner do we hear that chant of the pigs in a blanket and then we have a cop get shot, then the Democratic National Committee comes out and says, we endorse the Black Lives Matter. I mean, it's like the timing is a little dicey. The Black Lives Matter movement said, you know what, we don't want your endorsement. But should anybody be endorsing this group given the controversy that it's caused? Jesse.
I'm not sure if an endorsement is the right thing, but certainly a conversation. You know, we saw change in the last 10 days after the Black Lives Matter movement stormed Hillary Clinton. She pushed back and said, tell me what you want. Pure policy. And they now have a 10-point policy plan, very clear and spelled out as to what they're looking for in terms of criminal justice reform. Now, I think that their message could be even bigger and bolder and talk about the Black experience in America, that we have a systemic poverty crisis, we need education reform and criminal justice reform, of course. But politicians on both sides of the aisle need to be speaking to this group. Neither side can win without this coalition. If we're talking purely in terms of votes, as a political consultant, that's what I think of first, naturally. But on top of that, I mean, what do
you think of? Go ahead, Counsel.
But those aren't necessarily. Every violent chant is not necessarily representative of that movement. You know, you talked about Martin Luther King. People committed crimes in the name of the
No one
civil
from Black
rights
Lives
movement.
Matter came out and condemned those comments and said,
I'm not justifying that.
What about that? But that's an
they
interesting
should.
point, because if they're organized enough to have their 10-point plan, that aren't they organized enough to come out and say, those folks in Minnesota do not speak for us. That is not our message of pigs in a blanket. Go ahead, Dominic, on the end.
Yeah, but I think we need to distance or separate the intent of the movement from a few fringe extremists. That's the problem here. Look, it's the Ku Klux Klan is no more representative of Christianity, for example, as certain extremists in the Black Lives Matter movement is representative of the intent. And the intent is there has been systemic racism that has occurred in the shadows. There has been police misconduct that most of the population is not aware of. And the slogan really is that Black Lives Matter too. They matter also. Not that they matter to the exclusion of any other person or race.
Go ahead. In the back, Stacey.
Okay, so how is it a fringe group or an extremist side part of the Black Lives Matter movement when in Ferguson, I stood there and watched all of the protesters step up to the lines of police who were protecting the police department in Ferguson and tell them, we know where your wives live, we know your addresses, we're going to rape your wives, we're going to rape your children. They were in these men's personal space, spitting in their faces, throwing water bottles and bombs. These were not fringe elements. It was the majority of the protests.
And they would have a lot more credence, Megan. If Black Lives Matter, you want to impress me, you want me on your side, go to the inner cities. Discuss the black-on-black crime where lives are lost in Chicago, in Ferguson, in L.A. You don't hear any of that.
They're very focused on the cops.
That's what no one's going to. You hit it right on the button, because no one's going out there doing like Al Sharpton. He'll get up there on his bully pulpit and talk all kinds of nonsense. But you know what? He's not going into communities and saying, "Why are you killing each other? Why are you dealing drugs? Why don't you do what Dr. Wait a minute.
A lot of thoughts on Al Sharpton. Look at the crowd get fired up about Al Sharpton. Go ahead. In the back, Kiernan.
Yeah, I think that the DNC has endorsed Black Lives Matter, as divisive as it is, shows how far they've drifted from, you know, the great Democrats of a generation ago. Robert Kennedy was a great unifier, and this is a divisive message. And I think the American people in next year's election are going to look for somebody to bring us together. There's so many things pulling us apart: economics, race, a lot of the big issues that are always boiling. And the next president is really going to have to pull this country back together.
What are the Republicans supposed to do? Because, you know, you've seen some of the Republicans trying to reach out to the African African-American community. Rand Paul has tried that. Chris Christie is starting that with criminal justice reform pushes. However, they're in a difficult position because with the Black Lives Matter movement, it's almost become this thing where you're either with law enforcement or you're with the Black Lives Matter. And you saw Ted Cruz come out yesterday and say, I stand with law enforcement and the messages and not with this other group. So are they basically giving up the black vote if they do that? Go ahead, Ron.
Ron Martinelli, forensic criminologist, and I direct a team that investigates police-involved death cases. Does it trouble anybody here that the people that are the most vocal, the President of the United States, former Attorney General Eric Holder, Al Sharpton, couldn't even pass a basic police officer background exam? Doesn't that bother anybody? And doesn't it bother you that these false narratives that this group is based upon forensically are incorrect and have been proven to be inaccurate?
Like hands up, don't shoot, you're referring to.
Exactly. The Ferguson case, this started hands up, don't shoot, based on lies. And when you look at this politically, what happened to that witness that made that statement that started this whole thing? He was never even prosecuted. What happened to all of the protesters that went into those stores in the black community and burned those things to the ground? None of those people were prosecuted.
Those are all great questions, which we will hold over to. We're going to pick this up right after this break. There's plenty more we have to get to, and that's where we'll pick it up. But we are going to hear from Al Sharpton in a moment, because clearly this group has thoughts on him. He was one of the Democrats who was quick to blame the angry rhetoric of the Tea Party when a crazed gunman opened fire in Tucson back in 2011. So where are those voices on the angry rhetoric we are hearing today? We'll look at that when we come back.